Que pasa Mufasa? My name's Dennis Walker, and this is the Mycopreneur podcast. We're kicking off the big shebang today with a badass journalist who goes by the name of Michelle Janikian. If you haven't heard of Michelle by now, you must be living under a rock. Michelle's the author of the book, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion, as well as a prolific drug journalist who writes for Playboy, Rolling Stone, Double Blind, Teen Vogue, many others. I am very excited to get this show on the road. So without further ado, welcome to the Mycopreneur podcast.
Wow, Michelle Janikian, what's up?
Hey Dennis, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and what a rare privilege we have to be able to do this in person together in this era of isolation.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is actually my first podcast in person. And this is actually, so we're at a really sacred place to me. So that's also really special. And this is a friend of mine that wants to join the party, and yeah, really appreciate the invite.
Of course, yeah, thanks for being here. And you brought a whole crew of dog guides with you too.
Yeah, these are my spirit animals. But these dogs live in the park. They're not actually my dogs, but I feed them often, and so they like to hang around.
They sure recognize you. They loved you. As soon as Michelle showed up, they really flocked to her and guided us all the way up to this special sacred spot. All right, well, let's get right down to it. So, Michelle, you've built a thriving freelance business off of writing about drugs. Would your teenage tripper self find it weird that your adult self now occupies the space of professional and cultural legitimacy for writing about substances that used to be taboo?
That's such a great question. I actually think a lot of how proud my teenage self would probably be. My teenage self was not that different than I am right now, surprise. But I started, experimenting with altering my consciousness as a teen, and I got in a lot of trouble for it. And I also just didn't really know about safe use and what I was doing, and just that there was a thing called harm reduction or spiritual use and all this stuff. And so, I think I always say that I think my teenage self, I really wish I could go back and tell her, because she was actually quite a depressed person, and really, I don't know if, I just feel like she would be really excited to know that it actually all works out. It's not all really bad and horrible, that, good things are coming, and that you just need to kind of stick to your guns and be safe, and that, it can work out. And so that's, it's a funny question, actually.
Right. Well, speaking of good things coming, you've just recently launched a course with Psychedelics Today called Navigating Psychedelics for therapists and clinicians. What's that course all about, and what was your role in it?
It's not my course. I'm not teaching it. I just am helping Psychedelics Today promote it. I might do a course with them, but that's not going to be till later this year. But navigating psychedelics, I can talk about the course a little bit because it's really important. So I work with Psychedelics Today. It's this really popular podcast, and they also do courses mostly for clinicians. So their audience is mostly physicians, therapists, people who want to be psychedelic assisted therapists or integration therapists. And the course is really to teach clinicians everything they need to know about psychedelics that they weren't taught in med school or grad school. It's really important. I think it's really great, and it's why I'm helping to promote it. But it's taught by all other clinicians, so obviously I'm not a teacher. I'm not a medical doctor or a therapist. But there's some of the biggest names, longest standing people who have helped write the MAPS manual, which is in clinical trials. There's a lot of really important people involved teaching physicians about how to help people integrate psychedelic experiences, make meaning of them. And just about the science, history, all the things, they don't, aren't taught in university. And so I think if you're a physician looking for a good way to learn about psychedelics, because I do believe that more, people than ever before are going to look to professionals to help them integrate their experiences in the next couple of years. They already are. It's a really great course to learn and to be able to support people in that process, and to kind of get in the, your foot in the door in this emerging space.
And I think that's so important, because we are the same age, and coming up experimenting with psychedelics, I personally didn't really have any social mores or elders or guides to help facilitate that transition. So of course there was a little bit of literature out about it, but these days as mushrooms and psilocybin and psychedelic medicines are garnering more representation in mainstream media and in pop culture, I think it's so important that there is this container of professional therapists and clinicians who are well vetted and researched in this space to be able to help transition people in their own exploration and experiences.
I agree. Yeah, no, it's great. Psychedelics Today does a lot of great work. They have other courses. Their podcast's really great. Just a moment to plug them.
Shout out Psychedelics Today.
Shout out to Psychedelics Today.
Well, I got a lot of mileage out of reading your April 2019 article for Playboy titled Hallucinogenic Healing: Could Psychedelics Cure Toxic Masculinity? And that's a critical dialogue in global society today as we wrestle with impending ecological doom. Domestic violence peaking in relation to the pandemic and increasing social isolation, and on a more local level for us here in Mexico, the prevalence of femicide, which has even been called Mexico's other pandemic. What's the role of mushrooms and psilocybin in dismantling the patriarchy?
Wow, I mean, that's a big question. So the article, I started out kind of naively thinking that, maybe mushrooms can cure the patriarchy of its horribleness, right? And help make men more sensitive and everyone more equal. But that was actually quite naive, and I don't know if I really believe that anymore. But looking, doing the research for that piece and talking to men, and I think I learned that if you want to become a more sensitive person and you take psychedelics, you will, because it's all about intention, right? But if men go into a psychedelic experience, or anyone, it doesn't have to be a man, and that's not their intention, you can come out and just be the same old asshole that you were before. So even though I think that psychedelics can really help, make you more empathetic and open your mind to just other people's feelings and experiences, you have to also be open to receiving that. And if you're not, then it's just not going to work that way. They really can help open people up, but it's not a magic bullet, unfortunately. But as we're seeing more widespread use, maybe things will soften up a little. There's so many more men doing yoga and meditating and these kinds of things. And so, yeah, but I'm not really sure, because at the same time, so what I didn't include in that piece, and now I guess I have the platform to address it, is that there's a lot of abuses of power in the psychedelic space, in ceremonies, in retreat centers, between psychedelic therapists and very vulnerable people under the psychedelics. There's been reports of sexual abuse and abuses of power. And so these are men who are very enlightened on psychedelics, or people, not always men. These are men, women, non-binary people, I think, probably, well, anyway, that are, using their power over sick people who want help with psychedelics and using them sexually. And so I don't think it's the cure, but I do hope that, as the psychedelic community becomes more mainstream, if we can regulate this stuff and put this stuff above board, get it out of the underground, there could be less abuses of power. You could feel safer in that container if you are a vulnerable or marginalized person. And so, I have mixed feelings about that piece, because I don't think it can cure toxic masculinity.
Sure,
That's a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, that idea of the magic bullet or the quick fix in Western medicine and culture has come up a few times in this podcast, and a particularly eloquent response that I had from a former interview guest is that mushrooms really deepen neural networks. So if you go in with the wrong intentions, you're deepening your relationship to those intentions. And that conversation is particularly interesting to me in relation to things we've seen politically and socially in the United States. And that we used to have this kind of magical thinking of you take psilocybin and it connects you to nature and to the Tao and to the spirit. And of course it can do those things, but maybe there are people, and I think there's evidence of this, who are going in focusing on the wrong things, and it's really deepening their sickness and deepening their mental unwellness. So that is an area of study I think that's very important to look into, is how can you create these safe containers where people get the most beneficial and safe and responsible healing experiences out of psychedelic use. When did you first develop an interest in mushrooms?
Yeah, I was like about 17, I think. I had my first mushroom experience. At the time, I've always been an avid reader, and I was reading a lot of like 60s counterculture literature, like the electric Kool-Aid acid test, and just like a lot of work by Ken Kesey and the Beats and stuff like that, like every teenager does. But I really wanted to experience it firsthand, and I was also already I had a really strong relationship with cannabis already, and I thought that mushrooms would be like the next level of that relationship. I was kind of wrong. Mushrooms are very different, but I think that's a pretty common misconception and just kind of like path teenagers take. And I had a really powerful experience. I write about it in the intro to my book. I'll do this quick little, I brought my book. I write about it. It was a really intense experience. I was totally by myself because I didn't know anything about safe use. I didn't know anything really more than like all this like really crazy triplet I was reading, which is like not like, anything like my book. It's not like a guide on like, oh yeah, how do you do this in a like safe, responsible way? I was reading about like acid tests and all this kind of crazy 60s stuff. And, but anyway, so I took mushrooms with my best friend, who I'm about to take mushrooms with in like 2 weeks. I'm so excited. And then they didn't kick in for like 2 hours, and I went home, and literally like on the drive home, I started feeling it. And then I tripped in my childhood bedroom, mostly looking into the mirror and like just having just profound realizations, like profound experiences that like I was a worthy, lovable person. Just like I was dealing with a lot of stuff. Like I had an eating disorder at the time, and I never like looked in the mirror and thought I was beautiful before until that night. I cried so much. You're
making me cry.
I watched like my face melt, and it was just really strong. And I don't think I should have gone into it alone, but that did end up being my initiation. And from that moment, I was like, wow, this world, there's a whole world here. And I got really into psychedelics and reading everything. And I tried acid and just all these things. And it was like a progression from like 17 to 19, and then it slowed down again. And, now it's definitely picked up again. But anyway, that's the long story.
And I wanted to address that hiatus that you took. I heard you on the Cosmic Nod podcast. You mentioned how for much of your 20s, you did not use psilocybin. What called you back to psilocybin?
That's a good question. But I was struggling with some depression, but also just like who I was and my role and what I was doing with my life. And, I was reading a lot more about mushrooms again lately, and I just was curious and I wanted to get back in, and I'm really glad I did, because it is helping me a lot. It's not been a quick fix. My depression isn't cured. I still struggle from time to time, but I'm able to like ride it out in a way. It's like I know just like maybe a challenging part of my trip that like I feel really depressed this week, but it's like not gonna be forever. And you can just like during a trip you can be like, hey, but all things end. Like even this nausea, even this nasty feeling, like it's just part of this like wave. And so mushrooms have helped me just and to accept when I am feeling pretty depressed, so like to put less pressure on myself, because it'll be like, oh, I feel depressed and I'm waking up later, I'm not getting as much work done, and then I feel really bad and I'm missing deadline, and it just becomes this cycle of like horribleness. But mushrooms have helped me step back, and now when I am feeling really depressed, I can just kind of recognize it and be like, you know what, I'm gonna ask for an extension, I need a little time, I'm gonna take today off, go to Frontera, get some chilaquiles, just like, enjoy myself today, because I feel like crap, like my brain is on fire or something. And it's not that I go into a mushroom experience when I'm feeling like that, but my past mushroom experiences have helped me learn that it's like not the end of the world. Like, like when you're in a really deep mushroom place and you see that all your problems that cause you so much dread are actually kind of petty and things are going to be fine. Like grand scheme of things, missing that deadline isn't the end of the world. And so, that spacious quality for me has been a lifesaver, and I'm glad I did get back into mushrooms, because I don't know how I would have survived the last 2 years without that.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about having these conversations and dialogues is so many different people frame their thinking in a way where you have similar sentiments, but it's like somebody else is saying it and you go, that's what it is. And one of our previous guests mentioned how for him, some of the power of psilocybin is that he's able to experience these negative emotions and feelings without being overwhelmed by them, but just to be able to sit with them and feel confident and say, okay, this is going to pass and I have to witness this, but I don't have to let it suppress me.
Yeah, really get me down, because that just makes it so much worse. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that kind of gets missed in the dialogue sometimes when we talk about mushrooms being a cure for depression, because it's like maybe, but really what they teach you is to just kind of like be more of accepting of all your mood states, that it is going to like, you know, you take one strong trip and then you come back and you're never depressed again. Like it kind of gets put that way in the media. And I really try not to put it that way in my own work, because that's not what I've experienced. And I think that if more people are trying this, especially at home, like not with a doctor in a clinical trial or something, like that's going to be their experience too. And to not like give up or to not feel like this doesn't work for you or you're really damaged and even psychedelics won't cure you. Like, nah, it's not like that. Like, it's a slow burn, you know. You got to really learn to be comfortable with yourself, and then other things start to fall into place. I haven't mastered it, but it's starting to work for me, so I do believe in it.
It sure looks that way.
Oh, thanks, man.
So thinking about psychedelics moving into the mainstream and having more of a platform, they are enjoying a worldwide, long overdue renaissance. And their enormous potential health benefits are being touted by leading academic institutions, mental health professionals, and more, they're garnering representation in mainstream media and even pop culture. There's almost a universal praise for these medicines. What do you suppose are some of the risks and concerns inherent in the use of psilocybin that maybe don't get talked about as much?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm actually struggling here, because I keep thinking of all these risks that are like, you know, the stereotypical, like, oh, you're going to go crazy, or you're going to have a bad trip and jump out a window. And we are really making a lot of progress and breaking those in the current resurgence. But like, what are some of the other risks you hear about? I don't know.
Bipolar disorder, or maybe underlying schizophrenia. And of course, when treated in a clinical and therapeutical setting, that's an argument for regulation and for legalization and having some kind of governing oversight with these. That's something I've personally witnessed living in San Francisco and having 18 and 19-year-olds who have no experience previously with psychedelics, who all of a sudden are thrust into the middle of Haight Street or Golden Gate Park on a high dose. So I suppose from my own personal experiences and things I've witnessed, one particularly interesting story, it wasn't psilocybin, but it was LSD. I saw a kid wander into the middle of a reality television show set and start helicoptering, and they had to try to remove him, and they ended up calling an ambulance, and everybody scattered. But it's those kinds of concerns about, it's kind of the Wild West right now in terms of these substances are more available probably than they ever have been before in one sense. And
well, I would just say, like, what's lacking there is education. Like, and I think we need education for people, for teens as well as adults, on safe, responsible use. Like, that's what I'm all about. And also education on how to deal with people tripping, because calling an ambulance is like the worst thing you can do for someone on acid, but there's just no training for people to be like, oh, actually, you know, can so-and-so go sit with that guy for like, you know, 30 minutes until he calms down and we can kick him out? Like, because talking through would be a lot more effective response to that situation of that guy in the reality show than calling the ambulance. But no one would like know that or have the like, you know, compassionate response to do that. I think we need to have compassionate response to recreational users. I'm really like kind of bored of this topic, of this conversation that it's like only okay with a doctor and in the clinical setting. Like, I think for healing, like, yes, having a trained professional is going to be really helpful for you. But not everyone's looking for psychedelics for healing, and like, why does that have to be bad? Like, I think that if you go into a psychedelic experience, as long as you're not like hurting anyone else, you know, infringing on anyone else's liberty, you're taking some safe use things into consideration, like dose and set and setting, who you're with, you know, what you're going to do. I I think that it should be legal and regulated, and then we can educate teenagers on how to do so safely. We can educate everyone, or maybe like research will show that maybe teenagers shouldn't take acid because it raises their chances for HPPD, and maybe they should wait till they're 25 or older because those risks go down. Like, I'm not sure if that's true, but I think research might show that in the future. And just all these things, we need a lot more research and education, and then I think it should be regulated, and then people won't be like, so maybe that guy wasn't even on acid. A lot of like things that are sold on the black market, the underground market as acid, like aren't. It's one of the most misrepresented substances. If you're not testing your substances, another thing we could educate or have available to the public if this was legal would be so important. Like acid could be N-bomb and these more serious, these more dangerous, these are more toxic substances. LSD is very low toxicity. And so I just really hope that, it can be legalized and regulated eventually, and we can educate folks. And then I think that stuff, I don't know, that's just going to be part of it. Like, we just need to learn how to deal with it. And I also feel like when we demonize use outside of these like really rigid boxes that are so lame and just like don't make any sense, like, people who use psychedelics at concerts or something, they also have really powerful experiences. Sometimes it's really healing. Sometimes they really connect to the music with their friends or the whole planet. And so who's to say that like what's more healing than like what's more therapeutic, what's more beneficial? Like, I think everyone's different, and we need to respect that when we move forward with policy changes, personally.
Well, it's wonderful to hear you frame it that way. And personally speaking, my first psychedelic experience was at a concert on a half-eighth, and it was a transcendental, magical experience with the sun setting and seeing Ozo Motley playing and connecting with a few of my close friends. I had that sense of elation and of the possibility and the limitlessness of this new space that I had discovered. And I wish that everybody could experience that feeling.
Me too. And like, as someone who struggles with depression on and off, like, like the reappreciation of life, you know, and you're just like, how could I ever be sad? Look at how beautiful the world is. Like, that, I get that feeling just coming to this park, you know, that we're at right now. I don't even need psychedelics, but it can be hard. I can lose my way from that. And psychedelics help me bring me back and just to this center home, beautiful place. And I do wish people had access to that. I think it's a really just beautiful part of this world. I can't believe that it's like psilocybin, especially, it's natural, grows on the earth. It's so many mushrooms grow in this country, and it's illegal. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's an obnoxious notion to think of criminalizing a plant, much less one with so much proven historical use and impossible to overdose on, so many biological and emotional and health, physical benefits that are related to it. So I'm very happy to see the reemergence into the mainstream and to have this dialogue moving along. I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, but Ronan Levy, who's the founder of Field Trip Health, has mentioned recently that in order for the general population to accept psilocybin and sacred mushrooms, mushroom medicines, etc., we need more cultural influencers speaking about it. You're definitely one of those cultural influencers, and more people are starting to kind of come out of the woodwork and speak about their experiences, but you've been doing it for a hot minute. When did you decide to write and speak publicly about your psychedelic use and to advocate for it?
So I've been writing about cannabis for about 6 years now, and about halfway through that, about 3 years ago, I was starting to get disillusioned with cannabis, and I was like, you know, like, I love weed. Oh my God, I love weed. But like the whole like mainstreaming of weed just felt really wrong to me and weird. And I was like, you know, why is weed okay but all these other drugs aren't? Like, what is that? It's so like just this weird, exceptional, kind of elitist thing that just made me feel uncomfortable. And so I decided to start covering other drugs in my work and substances, plant medicines. Like, I don't care what word you use personally. With some, you know, nudging from some editors too. They're like, I literally got an email, so I've talked about this once, from my old editor at Playboy like 3 years ago. And she was like, Michelle, do you have experience taking any other drugs? I was like, I'm glad you asked because, obviously I do. And so that also helped. And now, you know, now that I'm I am kind of sort of an influencer in this space. It's like weird to say, but I am trying to open it up to even more. Like, yeah, mushrooms are great, but I'm not one of these mushroom people who's like, only mushrooms, everything else is bad. If it's like a chemical substance, it's bad. I'm like, nah, LSD is cool sometimes. It's for different uses. Ketamine's cool sometimes. Like, whatever, it's different as long as you're safe, like all these other things. And, I had another point. I just forgot it. But, so now I really want to start moving into like more harm reduction for all substances. Like, let's start talking about people who use heroin for personal growth and don't get addicted. Do you know that like almost 80% of people who use opioids don't get addicted? You don't hear that on the news because it's like, these are so bad, da, da, da. But it's just like a way to criminalize more people. It's not doing us any good. Like, I think we need to legalize all drugs and really educate people and really just stop with all the stigma and the othering and the my drug is good, yours is bad. Like, it really just comes down to like white supremacy and just horribleness. And I think that the future is destigmatizing and legalizing all drugs.
Preach! Wow, that's beautiful. That's music to my ears. But then again, if we decriminalize and legalize everything, it's dangerous to power structures. So how will we explain that to the people who sign our checks? So,
I don't know.
so who are some of the voices in the psychedelic movement that inspired you and shaped some of your foundational thinking about psychedelics and drugs? We'll open it up to all drugs.
Oh, cool. Well, I just finished reading this really awesome book that came out this week by Dr. Carl Hart. It's called Drug Use for Grown-Ups. It's awesome. He also has really influenced my thinking. I saw him speak at the 2019 Horizons conference about like the psychedelic exceptionalism and just like how it's wrong to like, say one drug is better than another. That just really doesn't actually make any sense. Who else? So I've formed a friendship with author Bet Williams. She wrote The Wild Kindness. Her book is so bold and fun and just also inspires me all the time. She's great. My colleagues at Psychedelics Today and Double Blind as well. Just the support and stuff that they give me. And Playboy. Actually, Playboy has a really fascinating psychedelic history that I want to dive into soon. Oh, so many I'm missing. Just like all the women in the space who never get any credit. Zoe Helene from Cosmic Sister has been I call her, she doesn't know this, but my psychedelic fairy godmother, because she's just always like sending me these really supportive, kind messages that bring me out of a funk. And, God, just so many that I can't think of off the top of my head. But there's a lot of cool people doing really cool work in the space that don't get talked about, and I really try to highlight them in my work and stuff more, and hope that they get more like a bigger platform as well, more diverse voices in this space. There's some really cool Black women growers I follow on Instagram, Mrs. Vicious and Silly Girls. I love their content too. Like, there's just so many people doing really cool stuff that just don't have the influential power behind them that other people do. Like, Paul Stamets is great, but I wouldn't name him as one of my influencers. He's just already doing his thing. I respect it, but yeah, I don't know. The women in the space are always really inspiring me.
Well, as a quick tangential aside, I wanted to mention that I went to college with one of Hugh Hefner's sons, and he actually invited me over to the Playboy Mansion one day, on Father's Day, no less. And it was quite a surreal experience. We went into their private zoo and into the grotto pool, and there's a music video of us freestyle rapping in the grotto that's out there somewhere. So
I never got to go. They sold it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Probably have one of my college peers to thank for that.
There's some rich guy thanking for that. No.
Speaking to access and representation, I had a question about it. Thinking about legalization and this framework of more and more therapeutic centers and clinics coming online, like Field Trip Health, Myco Meditations in Jamaica, a host of other ones. I look at some of these price tags attached to these experiences. And like, for example, Myco Meditations, their floor is like $5,000 for a 7-day experience, and upwards of $12,000 per person, give or take a few $100. So I wanted to speak about access and representation, about all these marginalized populations who really need access to these medicines. And do you suppose there's a way forward, or in my personal opinion, we need a more nuanced dialogue about, if we're going to legalize these, we need to make sure that not just affluent people can visit bougie lofts in Soho or whatever in order to get treatment. How can we create that platform so that people in inner city Detroit, although lots of people, Kalindi E, shout out, and his whole crew were already doing that, are doing that. How can we approach legalization in a way that's equitable and accessible to everyone?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, the retreat thing, those prices are crazy. So I think now that Oregon has legalized, psilocybin-assisted therapy, and it'll be rolled out in like 2 years, well, I really want to see, and I haven't been following to see if it's in the works, but I hope it is that therapy will be covered by Medicaid. I think that's a really important thing that'll make it more accessible, because right now these price tags, they're not going to go very far down. And the reason is it's like really time consuming, these psychedelic therapies, for really just highly educated professionals who just have a high hourly rate. You need like, right now psychedelic therapy is weird where it's like 2 therapists in a room with someone for like 6 to 8 hours. That's just like cha-ching, like $100 an hour or more per person. It's just a really expensive situation. And so, but if Medicaid covered it and the government would help pay those people's salaries, and then people who are on Medicaid could go and get that therapy, that would be so important, because there are so many people who can't even afford talk therapy because it's over $100 an hour, let alone like talk therapy on top of this very, experiential long thing. It's just not going to really get any cheaper. I think also in Oregon, like, I don't know how it's going to be set up. I'm trying. I have to follow it. But it could be like retreat centers there, right? I think that's what people are starting to talk about, and that would be cool. Oregon's beautiful. To go trip in the woods in Oregon, like a healing journey, would be so special. But yeah, like if all of those things can be covered by health insurance, especially Medicaid, I think that's what's really going to make it more affordable. So then it'll be like domestic, you have a cheaper flight. You won't have to go to Jamaica or the Netherlands or something. So hopefully keeping all this stuff like domestic and, within the American healthcare system, which, isn't perfect, but like maybe we could find a way to make this more accessible. But I don't know if that's going to happen. So just a quick tangent, my friend and source in Denver, Desmond Wallington, I think is his last name, is a psychologist at a ketamine clinic, and they're the only clinic in the whole country to accept Medicaid. And he was telling me that they don't make as much money as the other ketamine clinics, right? Like because other ketamine clinics can charge so much for especially the IV infusion, because it's just like all these other professionals you need to hook up to IV. So they do the intramuscular shots, which is cheaper for the patient because you don't need all the IV professionals. And they accept Medicaid. So he's saying that, like, he was telling me yesterday on the phone, they're getting all these like LGBT, like people of color, marginalized people getting therapy who could never afford it before. I think that's so powerful. He's the only Medicaid licensed ketamine therapist. Like, shout out to Desmond. It's amazing. And I hope that there's more of that. Why is it only in Denver? Why isn't it in California? Why is it in New York? Why isn't it in Mississippi? Like,
exactly.
And so... yeah.
Well, I can't remember who said this, but in Oakland, of course, it's been decriminalized. And a lot of these marginalized populations have been using, especially in Mexican and Chicano cultures, because there's this brujeria and shamanic lineage and ancient cultures that they're connected to. And a lot of that is because they've been neglected by the modern medical system, and they've had their access restricted to it. So they had to develop and continue to have to develop alternative modes of healthcare. And so when I see these clinics popping up, I think about the potential for more inner city use that's guided by elders and by people who are trained or who have that experience, and the positive impact it can have, immensely positive impact that it can have.
And who are from those communities. Because if we just have like rich white therapists going into these communities, like sometimes they can do more damage than they do good. They just don't understand where people are coming from. And they sometimes, like white therapists to marginalized communities, they end up just kind of like brushing off things they say and re-traumatizing them a little if they have racial trauma. And so I think we need to train people in those communities. But those people in those communities have a lot less access to they can't afford the training. The trainings to be a psychedelic therapist can be really expensive. There's a program at CIIS that's just like $40,000 for a year. You have to be a really successful person to be able to afford that, or just come from a family where you just have money, or just however that works. And I think, I'd like to see more affordable trainings.
Me too.
Everything. More affordable everything.
Me
please.
too. Well, let's take it away from the macro policy level and back into the micro personal level. Okay. Is there a sweet spot that you found in terms of dosage with psilocybin?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of 4 grams. I don't know. 4, sometimes. It depends on the mushrooms, though. So, like, it can, be tricky, because I'll take 4 grams of something and it won't be strong enough, actually. But it's like, I'll take 4 grams of some, really well-grown golden teachers, and it's like my zone. But I'm still figuring it out. I like to, like, when I get a new batch of mushrooms, I do like to get, like, a bunch, so I can explore that particular batch's sweet spots. And so I'll probably sometimes I start with a microdose just to make sure, like, I got the right stuff. And then I'll be like, all right, I felt it a little in my stomach. This is the thing. And then I'll, like, me and Martin will, like, take an eighth, like, and it'll be like, all right, that was okay. And then we'll just, like, work our way up from there. So I always like to experiment with, the different mushrooms I get to find new sweet spots. But, I talk to a lot of beginners, and I don't recommend 4 grams to most beginners, too. And I have to be really careful about the language I use, because I really feel like often when people talk openly about drugs, like, it's good for destigmatizing, but sometimes people, like, take my words as, like, it gives them permission to do whatever. And I don't really that's not the goal. I just want to give people the autonomy to make their own decisions and the information to make informed decisions. But I get all these emails where, like, oh, I read your article on candy flipping, and I felt like, oh, I should candy flip, and did it. And I was like, ugh, that wasn't exactly the intention, but oh well, like, what am I going to do? But I really just want to provide safe harm reduction info without, like, giving, just, like, I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything, but I guess I am trying to be like, I don't know, to take the stigma away. Like, it's this, like, fine line. I'm just still trying to figure it out. But so sweet spot is whatever you think the sweet spot is.
I find that there's different levels of value, and depending on what your intentions are. For example, we were recently at this beautiful waterfall called Roberto Barrios near Palenque, and took probably what would equate to a half-eighth, although they were fresh mushrooms that were local, which was super cool. And went in the waterfall and just had the most beautiful, relaxing, affirming, uplifting experience, right? That's one sort of experience. But if I were going for more of a meditative, trying to process issues or trying to explore, right? We mentioned how psychedelics and psilocybin are not just for healing, it's for exploration, it's for enjoyment too, right? It's not just all about, okay, you have PTSD or you have depression, you need to find treatment for it. It's like, you could be totally healthy and active, a member of a professional community, and these are for you too. And I found out through a baptism by fire from being young and not really understanding dosage and getting a whole bunch and being like, I guess I should take all of these. And I distinctly remember my induction into the macro dose world, where I was on a camping trip and I had what I would probably guess to be a half ounce and hadn't weighed it out, and just thought it would be a good idea to eat all of them. And it was an extraordinary experience. And it definitely shattered my worldview in a lot of ways, but in a very positive way. And that level of exploration, I've only recently begun to steel my nerves and my confidence to get back to, like, macro doses offer a lot of explorative potential, and there's a whole universe out there. And curious about your thoughts about that. Are you a fan of the macro dose?
Yeah, I don't do it that often because the recovery time's really long and I'm, like, a really busy person. But yeah, I mean, I am interested in exploring those realms. I do it, carefully too, because I can just, like, it can affect my mood too, like, with the recovery, and then I can have trouble, like, focusing, just, like, because it just seems so petty and boring and stuff for, like, a week after. But yeah, I am slowly working my way up to some higher zones and feeling some new energies, and it's really cool. I'm getting really into researching entities as well, although I haven't really met any. It's not from, like, personal experience. I'm just really fascinated by aliens and now, like, these kind of other psychedelic entities that are more common, like when you hear about people smoking DMT extract. But I think in high, really, macro doses, like we're talking like over 7-10 grams, like 10, 12, 15, right? Like I think entity experiences and these kinds of experiences can be possible. And they're fascinating.
I am so happy to speak about this with you, because for so long I've had to just kind of sit on this and only talk about it, with friends and whatnot. And now I feel this almost permission to be like, I need to talk about this. This is something that's important in my life. And I field enough questions in my own life from people who be like, what can you tell me about this? And being able to have these dialogues is really refreshing and really uplifting for me. So thank you so much for having that dialogue with me. So moving on to what you're working on right now, what are you working on right now?
So right now I'm reading a lot about near-death experiences, and I am going to write something about NDEs for Psychedelics Today. Eventually, it's going to take me forever. So, Joe, if you're listening to this, don't expect it anytime soon. No. And I'm also doing a lot of like harm reduction research, and I think I'm going to be doing something cool for a pretty mainstream outlet on that, which I can't talk about exactly. I'm going to be doing some courses too coming up. So I'm not doing the Navigating Psychedelics course with Psychedelics Today, but I am gonna, I think, be doing 2 different, how to take shrooms kind of courses with some 2 different outlets that I have to make sure that's all confirmed before I start promoting it.
Good idea.
What else? Oh, and I'm also working with this really cool gallery head shop in Vancouver called Studio AOK. We're gonna make kind of turn my book into a zine, do a really short mushroom zine. Hopefully to come out at the end of the year. So I have a bunch of fun projects that I'm just diving into now. I just started some research for a new piece on psychedelic music, and kind of trying to look into some of the, popular culture, or just some of the ideas we have in the psychedelic community about what makes good psychedelic music, and trying to poke some of those holes in some of the things that we've been taught to believe, you have to listen to spiritual music or no music with lyrics, these ideas that kind of float around when we talk about perfect psychedelic playlists. I want to start to explore some of those. So that's going to come up eventually.
That's really interesting for me personally, because I've been heavily involved in music production over the last decade and whatnot.
We should talk.
Yeah, we should. We're talking now.
Yeah.
And I had these breakthrough experiences early on with a couple of different bands, and then I would try to recreate them, and it was still cool, but it wasn't the same, right?
Yeah.
So I was always I think everyone's on the hunt for the good psychedelic playlist, right? For what you're going for there. Okay, so you just kind of spoke to that. I guess this is a reframing of that same question. Is there anything in particular right now that you're involved in that you'd like to promote, other than your badass book?
My book! This one's for you, by the way. What else am I... the courses, so courses are going to be just this new thing that's, it feels weird to promote them too much, because I hate being too, I don't know. Actually, I'm not an entrepreneur, really. I'm just an artist trying to support myself. So it's really hard for me. But yeah, if you're interested in doing these courses and online events, do it, because, the people who are running them, they're not just doing it to get rich. They're just doing it to have a paycheck. And so, even the courses I'm not involved in on Double Blind Mag and Psychedelics Today, I would recommend checking them out, because they're really valuable. And, so I also might do a course. This is not sure if I should talk about it yet, but I am going to do more work on alien abductions and the connection between aliens and psychedelics. And I might do a whole course on it. I'm not sure, but I also might be moderating a panel on it on an upcoming conference, and just creating more content in that area, because it's been really fascinating to me. So Yeah, aliens.
I love it. When you mentioned the near-death experiences, Becca definitely perked her ears
that.
up.
I was like,
yeah,
we gotta talk.
she's very interested in that, and often says, "Can you stop what you're doing? I need to tell you this story that just happened," and then have to put my stuff down and listen. And they're always fascinating. So I really hope that you do focus a little bit of your creative genius on that realm.
I'm reading this older book by Kenneth Ring, something Omega something. And it was one of the books that like kind of was really influential in the 90s, like putting the ND or the 80s even, like this concept on the map. It was after Raymond Moody wrote like the first in the 70s, and then Kenneth Ring is like the next NDE researcher that became pretty famous. I'm reading his books now, and yeah, I'm just getting it's really fascinating. It seems so many of the experiences seem really similar to like high dose kind of mystical experience stuff, like feeling the light and that all knowing, like you go to a homecoming and you know everything. Like I've experienced that on mushrooms, and I'm like, wait, that's the same thing that people who come back from like being flatlined for a few minutes experience. Like that's crazy to me. There has to be a connection there. And so I don't know if I'll figure out like have any answers for people, but I'm just gonna like present to them all the crazy things I learn, and that'll be fun, I think.
And there's a fascinating connection with the cosmology of the Maya in the city that we live in. There's graffiti of Mayan UFOs all over town, and I'm like, we went to Palenque, and in particular, one infographic caught my eye that said that the Mayans they have a lot of inscriptions that predict events in the future and also make reference to events in the distant past, like 4,000 years in the past and 1,000,000 years in the future. And I go, okay, you've got Mayans and UFOs, and you've got events in the past and events in the futures, and this very misunderstood or not fully appreciated genius of the Maya culture and a lot of these indigenous ancestral cultures. It's fascinating.
John Mack's second book. So I wrote this article for Psychedelics Today that just came out about Dr. John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist in the 90s who worked with experiencers, or people who had alien abduction experiences. They preferred to be called experiencers. Try to respect that. And he did a lot of like kind of cross-cultural work where he interviewed people, in Africa and in South America and in Mexico who, this kind of like entity alien experience is like a pretty deeply rooted part of their communities and their myths and their origins of their people, and he does a really cool job of explaining some of that back in the 90s, and I find it really, there's a lot of work to be done there for sure. Like I find it all really, I don't know that much, but like just this so Mac's idea is kind of like, what if aliens aren't this like physical other thing that live in another planet? Like what if they're actually like part of this like maybe other realm or dimension of like a spiritual dimension, and they can actually, but the scary part about aliens is, but then they have the capability to cross the line between their spiritual dimension into our physical world and like take us with them. And that's, I think, what really freaks people out. Or if you start to believe in aliens in these more spiritual terms, and when you read about indigenous alien sightings and relationships, you start to believe in it a little more because like, yeah, because they just have like, so this is what Mack theorizes, and sometimes the language feels a little colonizing, but that indigenous people just have a greater sense of the spirit world, and that, they're more connected. And so this was always part of their culture. I'm still not sure how comfortable I am with all that language. I gotta sort it out in my own mind, but I think it's really fascinating.
Have you ever seen Pablo Ameringo's paintings? He was a Peruvian ayahuasquero, and he has an extraordinary gift for visual representation of his experiences. And there's a lot of aliens. There's a lot of spiritual beings. I'll send you some links to them because they're just so beautiful. And now he's passed away, and these paintings are going for like $50,000+ because everyone around the world is like, these are the most amazing paintings I've ever seen.
And I've seen that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah. This is very oddly familiar. So a parting shot. I think we've covered a lot of super amazing territory here. And I used to teach high school, and there may be a few younger, 18-year-old around there students listening to this or people. What is some of your advice going back to revisiting if you could talk to your 17-year-old self or your 18-year-old self, and you're starting to develop an interest and you have a curiosity in these substances? We can talk about psychedelics. We can open it to the spectrum of drug experience. What is some parting advice you have for some of the younger listeners?
I would just say that, just don't do drugs like super recklessly. I think back then, like, I kind of did drugs with a bit of a death wish. I just didn't realize I could get hurt. And until my friend, died, and then, you have a wake-up call, but like not from psychedelics, from other substances. But I just say, like, just give your intention some thought. It doesn't have to be this like setting spiritual intention. It's just like, do you want to get fucked up? Like, okay, but do you want to get hurt? Like, no, well, let's like find a middle ground of like how you can do this safely, not recklessly. Like, don't be driving cars, like obvious things. Like, maybe don't go into huge public settings on acid and stuff. Like, maybe lower doses you can figure out, like, but figure out your boundaries and stuff, like at home in small groups first, and then work your way out. And yeah, just be safe and look out for each other, and don't mix too many substances. That's my advice. And don't mix too much alcohol in there. You can take drugs without alcohol, it'll be fine.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that response. Shout out to all you former students out there in Mycopreneur verse. I think it's so important to have a more comprehensive drug education for youth. And having taught in a high school, there was rampant drug abuse going on, and there was so much, and maybe that's my old, perspective of it from where I was coming from, but I just felt that there was a lot of mixing going on.
Oh,
there was a lot of alcohol ingestion. There was a lot of pharmaceutical abuse going on, and surely some legitimate, amazing experiences people were having too. So, and the DARE program and the drug education program of former generations obviously was really effective in scaring people and in criminalizing drugs, but it really seems time to turn the page, turn over a new leaf, and focus on drug education.
Can you imagine if in high schools instead of DARE we had like harm reduction, like don't mix acid and lithium, like teaching people but this is like, Wellbutrin and psilocybin probably okay, can you imagine? But because so many teens too are on psychiatric medications, and mixing this stuff with meds is really dangerous. That's where kids like go to the hospital and have seizures and stuff, and so I really hope that we can have just more honest, just like not stigma, fear-based, information out there for people. It's online, the internet is just like, so, just like do your research, kids. Go on like Reddit or just like, Double Blind, like all these magazines providing this harm reduction stuff. Just like do a little reading first. Make sure all your friends will be safe. Make a fun little set and setting. Me and my friends used to skip school. Probably not the advice I want to give people, but like when we were going to do mushrooms together, we would, go to someone's house where the parents weren't going to be home and just create a beautiful little situation. It was safe. And, we had lots of fluids. We wouldn't drive cars, and we would just like, sit in someone's backyard and connect. And it was really beautiful. Now, I'm not recommending anyone skip school or anything. And maybe cool parents could like be home and be your trip sitter if you're all over 18. I have heard cool older sisters, stuff like that. So as we're all getting more educated and open and breaking the stigma, I hope as like a community we can come together and make sure teens are safer, make sure we're all safer by looking out for each other and not just like demonizing each other for stuff that isn't, it's just expanding our minds. It's not that, bad. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I think that's high ground that we can end on. That's a wonderful point to ride off into the sunset. Thank you for bringing us to your special spot here in this beautiful ecological park. And thank you for joining us today on Mycopreneur.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for having me, Dennis. I appreciate it.
There's so much to cover in the mushroom universe, and so many mycopreneurs leveraging the infinite potential of fungi to create a more ecologically balanced, inclusive, and equitable world for all of us mischievous little monkeys. I am completely stoked that you've chosen to spend some of your hard-earned time in our little corner of the mycoverse. Hop on the gram, say what's up. At Mycopreneur Podcast, that's the handle. Don't get it twisted. We've got the full suite of social media up and running. Twitter, Mycopreneur. Got the YouTubes dialed in, Mycopreneur. Drop us a line. Tell your grandma and your kooky uncle. Tell your wife and your kids. If you're a mycopreneur yourself, you want to hop on the pod, by all means, willkommen, bienvenidos, welcome. Don't be a stranger. Let us know your thoughts on this episode, and also let us know what you want to hear in future episodes. This is a team effort. Thanks for stopping by the Mycopreneur Podcast. Have a lovely day. We'll see you back here next week.